When you think about designing in a world of AI, we're designing with data. Previously, you would think about, I need to know all the variations. I want to set up the best case golden paths of how a consumer or user goes through them, and you want to map out all those things. And we were very focused in our craft about like getting those golden paths to be perfect. And then you would try to address the edge cases around it, right? That's not the case anymore. Now you're designing with data, and a lot of times that data you don't even know the results of it yet. So, as designers, we have to think about kind of the containers and the outcome of how we might want to display that data and the contextualism or the contextual nature between two different sets of data.
Good afternoon. I'm so delighted today to open a conversation on real time intelligence, really rethinking the ways consumer expectations are changing and the ways businesses need to change to meet that need. So delighted today to welcome Jeff Gelfuso, who's Senior Vice President and Chief Design Officer at Qualtrics, an experience management company. I'm also excited to bring him onto the stage because he also previously served as Chief Product Experience Officer and Chief Design Officer at Workday, and he brings a breadth of cross-functional views to experience design as a practice, from product to engineering. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Gordon. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Let's kick it off to give audiences a bit of context on Qualtrics and your new role there. I'm personally excited to learn more about this role because you're passionate about experience design, experience management, but Qualtrics as a company literally does that day in, day out. What does being at a company like Workday to now being at a company like Qualtrics?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a very similar role in Workday and in both companies. And of course, Workday is focused on primarily the HR and finance side of running the business. But if I look back over my career, there's just been this kind of common red thread through everything that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of. Other companies, just like Microsoft and Amazon, Meta as well. And that's always been focused on experience, Gordon. You and I like talk about this all the time. Yes, I may lead in one role a design and research discipline, or in another role a product and design or engineering, but I always approach it from people first lens and a human centered design approach. And I think about experience as a general category about how we think about helping individuals and consumers have great experiences. And in my role at Qualtrics, to your point, like it couldn't be a better match. We are the leader, a category definer of experience management. And for our listeners, if you don't know Qualtrics or if you don't know what that means, you might know Qualtrics even under the hood as, oh, those surveys I take sometimes after staying at a hotel or going to an event or having a meal at my favorite restaurant. All of those above in many cases are the base of our customers that we serve and able to help companies understand sentiment of the experiences that their customers and their employees are having. So we have a very basic framework that you can think about of this notion of listening, understanding, and acting. And so over the years, Qualtrics has grown from being just a survey based company into basically an always on listening multi channel platform. And so, what that enables for our biggest and best customers is for them to understand not only through surveys, but also all of the ratings and reviews that a customer may post about that company, the tickets they may file or the calls they may make to customer care center, and even those kinds of customers who may have a corporate presence, a digital presence, and maybe a physical store presence, the connection between all of those things, right? And so we just really help understand your view of your customer from all those different angles, as well as for those companies who use our EX capabilities or our employee experience capabilities. In addition to customer experience, they also get then a view of how are their employees doing, how are they feeling, what are their sentiments in the company, which is a great connection to their customers as well. And so it's such an exciting space to be in, and I feel so fortunate to be in a role where I get to impact experience at that kind of scale for millions and millions of customers worldwide.
I think also what's exciting is Qualtrics does serve a lot of the Fortune 100 in terms of scope and breadth of experience management. So I think your views will be really interesting to think about how is the consumer landscape changing? What are you seeing across that landscape? As much as the ways businesses are reorganizing themselves to meet those expectations. To kick it off here, I know you recently also did one of the keynotes at your kind of like flagship conference with Qualtrics. What are you seeing in terms of consumer expectation changes? We're in an age of AI. It feels like everything is moving a little bit more chaotically with more speed. So, how are you feeling? What's the sentiment on the ground?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have this conversation quite a bit. And like other major technology shifts, there comes all kinds of changes around those. Like you can think about when a lot of capabilities and computing power was on premise, was in the company or in data centers. And there was a big shift when that moved to the cloud and the access that gave so many individuals and companies. Another big shift when the iPhone came out, and now you had this marketplace of apps and everything was right at your fingertips. And now we're going through this other shift in AI where now the speed of information and intelligence and answers that you can get is again instantaneously, right? So each of those shifts in technology have also caused major shifts in both our culture and the way that individuals and consumers behave, right? So think about what it used to be to shop online. First, before you could even shop online, and now that you could, it still was like, oh, I've got to wait a few weeks to get that item. And now the expectation is I get it in hours or even days is a long time now. And so consumers expect that. They expect to be able to get on FaceTime and connect with their families around the world in an instance, right? Or send secure messages to people and reach people around the world in an instance. And I think that whole access, social media has given us this notion of seeing what it's like, whether more real or not, for many people and connecting us to different interests that we have. All those things are right at our fingertips now. And so consumers don't want to wait. And that's very true for individuals, employees working in any business, right? You're constantly under pressure to have the information on demand right now to be able to answer the questions about how your business is performing or how your customers are behaving. And so, more than ever, we are in this age of on demand, real time intelligence. And that may be in a consumer setting where I'm just trying to find information about something I'm doing in my personal life, or it may be in a business where I'm trying to run a voice of a customer program, or I'm trying to understand the customer satisfaction or loyalty of my business, or demands for my new product, right? All of those things we used to have to wait days, weeks, months to understand that information, to analyze it and get the right insights from it that we could act on. Now, in the era of AI, and especially at Qualtrics, we're providing those kinds of capabilities to individuals within companies in the moment, right? And that's both incredibly powerful and scary at the same time. And there's a lot of things that go into it, but it's interesting to see how that shift in behaviors has changed not only in business, but also in the consumer world as well.
I think one thing to add to immediacy and speed, as we're seeing in the age of AI, in one of your Qualtrics consumer trends report for 2025, it actually touched upon the dimension of trust. And I want to highlight a little bit because I think it actually speaks to maybe the tensions I'm seeing and maybe what you're seeing is yes, there's immediacy and speed, but there's also trust. And I think in your report, it said since 2024, there was a 11% drop in consumers being comfortable using AI in 2025. So 46% of consumers are comfortable using AI in 2025. And the sentiment here was, yes, every company is racing for AI, but if consumers are seeing less and less trust, will that organization use it responsibly? What does that mean for how businesses need to also respond to that? So curious to hear more about trust. That was such a big conversation at the roundtable we had.
Yeah. And the way I think about it is it's a spectrum, right? And so trust is something that many brand leaders have always talked about. And it's been incredibly important to driving overall long term value and brand loyalty. And many individuals in kind of technology and infrastructure talk about it from a security standpoint, right? Like the level of risk of customers' data. And that's a really important, critical part about the business. But I think when we look at it from a spectrum of things that are maybe easier to adopt, and I don't mean from a technical angle, I mean from a level of risk, meaning things that are less risky and therefore over time consumers begin to learn and understand and trust them more, to things that are more risky and that maybe over time consumers and businesses take a longer time to adopt. And I'll give you a couple examples, right? So I remember the days when search was a new thing, online search was a new thing, and many people loved the access of having finding anything at your fingertips. but they were like, where's the data come from? Like, how do I know this is trustworthy? And now everyone will just Google it or will just find it. And that's just a common thing that's become something that people trust and understand that's pulling from multiple sources across the internet. Many of the sources that they would have to have gone to individually to find the information you need. And so if you think about how businesses are evolving with AI, it's very similar. So there's some of these use cases in industries that may be lower risk. For example, we were talking about information, maybe commerce and retail. And in those kinds of scenarios, you might be doing online shopping. You might be trying to find out more information about a product or learn if it's right for you. The levels of risk there are lower in what AI can provide to you and how much you will actually really trust it, right? So if somebody, let's say, is using an AI agent to give you some information about a product or is trying to help you make a return, and maybe you're interacting with an agent at first, like usually that's a pretty seamless experience. We've all had those kinds of customer service calls where you're having a chat with an agent first, and maybe if your issue's a little bit more complicated to get routed to human. But in that, what's the highest risk? Maybe you're not satisfied with the interaction. Maybe you can't make your return as quickly as possible, but it's fairly low levels of risk, right? Maybe other industries like banking and financial, you might have a problem with your account, or maybe you're worried about a fraudulent payment. Now you're giving that agent access to maybe your banking information or your financial information, right? And so there's a little bit higher level of risk there. And so you want to make sure if you're a company in that industry that you're not giving the wrong information out to somebody or potentially exposing things that might put that customer at risk. At the highest end of that is when we get into more government or healthcare, more highly regulated industries that now we have compliance. Now maybe you're having a doctor patient conversation, or you're having something about an ailment that you have, or something about your health and well being. And now you're really talking about either things that might be treatments for you, or it might be medications or things that you might be prescribed. Those are very high risks. Like you don't ever want to give out the wrong information that makes somebody make a poor decision for their health. And so there you have a high level of trust that you need to have not only in the company and the provider, but also in the technology they're using. So AI there needs to be very careful about the types of information, sources that it comes from, and how you can really understand the depth of those things. So when I think about those behaviors and the way that businesses are having to change, it does depend on the industry you're in, and it depends on that level of risk that's involved in the interaction that you're having with your customers. And so companies are seeing that maybe in those lower risks, more consumer like experiences, they're seeing faster adoption for good reason. And maybe in some of those more highly regulated or higher risk industries, they're seeing more cautious adoption to some of these AI capabilities.
I'm curious to hear, knowing that we're seeing this trust dimension, but there's also a lot of nuances for the business leaders listening, is like, how should they think about the ways they are working, the ways they're organized to meet this new era of experience management? So, thinking about just the breadth of industries you mentioned, from the government to consumer tech that might be moving at a faster pace, like, how are you seeing experience leaders reorient or rethink their operations to meet this new need?
Yeah, it's changing daily. Like we're having these kinds of conversations inside our organization. And just like we were speaking about at the roundtable, many leaders are talking about this shift that they're either faced with that feels either forced upon them, or they're at the middle of trying to figure out and to lead in their organizations. And really, when it comes down to it, most companies want to use this opportunity, I believe, to really enable their employees to do things in a more efficient, in a more productive, in a more empowering way, right? Like they want to use AI to really supercharge their employee workforce. And in a lot of ways that means, well, boy, a lot of people spent a lot of time doing more mundane tasks, and that took up a lot of their day. And are there great ways where we could automate some of those tasks and automate some of those workflows and free people up to work on the more strategic and solve bigger, more complex problems? And so when you think about that, if you're in a company that believes that and has that in their values and keeps people at the center, like we do at Qualtrics, we're really focused on how do we elevate that human experience. And so what that means then is how do we work today and what would we want to change to enable that? So there's various processes from different disciplines all the way through like operations and HR and people management to product development. And so we're rethinking and re-examining, okay, something that may be really close to our hearts is like this the design and development process, right? Like from ideation to definition to concept to building, understanding, testing with users, and eventually like shipping that product to market, just as an example, right? Many of those processes in the product development lifecycle have had different disciplines and very kind of siloed handoffs, right? So a product manager might have wrote a PRD and had discussions with businesses and customers to test it. We might have done user research or market research to understand those things. Design might have done concepts and validated those et cetera, all the way that we go through into engineering and release and scale, right? Now those things are changing. Now there's many of those roles where we can prototype something in real code very early in the process, right? Or we might be able to simulate a situation that we weren't able to do because now our models can run these tests. So these are just a couple of examples where we're thinking about the traditional roles in those processes and in those life cycles are blurring and changing. And in some ways, that can be a little bit scary and it can be worrisome to some folks who now have to think, do I need to build a whole new set of skills? Do I need to rethink all of the things that I used to work on every day? Or is some of these things going to be replaced by other disciplines? And so it's a really exciting time, but it's also a messy time. Figuring out what that looks like and how people will work through this change is something that we're right in the middle of discussions around today.
Jeff, how is business competition evolving in the AI era? I know we just briefly talked about the importance of speed and immediacy, but also trust as a dimension. Would love to hear examples from what you're seeing in the industry as much as what you're doing as a design executive reshaping Qualtrics.
To your point, Gordon, a lot is moving very quickly, very rapidly, and that's changing. And those dimensions that we talked about are critically important. So we can't forget the notion that at everything we need to do, it needs to be really focused on how are we delivering on our promise and how are we building that trust with our customers. With that said, if we zoom into kind of the design and development process, I think many leaders are confronted with this challenge today. And we're really focused on like, how can we bring many of what was those kind of siloed roles and siloed handoffs closer together where those lines are blurring in between the handoffs and helping to then understand product market fit faster, build new concepts and iterate on them with customers faster, design and code and actually eliminate handoffs to engineering, right? So there's some really interesting ways and a lot of new tools that we're experimenting with and trying out. At the end of the day, really to bring a high quality experience to market that meets customer needs, but in a faster, more efficient way.
Do you see experience quality increasing or decreasing in the short term versus what you might hope to see in the mid to long term?
Yeah, we had this conversation at the roundtable, right? I guess it depends on how you define quality, and everybody defines that differently. I'll give you just my point of view on it. Where I sit in my organization, I look at that as like, how do we define the quality of the experience? So, is it meeting customer needs? Is it solving a real problem for them? Is it doing it in the most usable and useful way? And are they getting to the outcome that they wanted to achieve through that task or through that workflow to get that done? I think we can all debate design quality and level of polish and fit and finish and those things. And we do a lot of that as design leaders. But when I look at kind of quality at the experience end to end, those are the dimensions that I'm really focused on.
So, with the kind of orientation towards meeting customer expectations below or above that line, I'm curious to think in the age of AI, what are you seeing? Are you seeing consumers more disappointed? I'm curious to learn a little bit more of your view because I'm imagining all the design leaders listening, where are they seeing the bar of customer experience quality going?
Yeah, that I love that question because it's evolving, right? We don't know what it'll ultimately end up looking because we're right in the middle of building it, developing it. But I think there's some things that are still going to be true, Gordon. Like when we think about design principles and we establish a series of principles, you're executing on those principles regardless of the modality, the way that you interact, the problem you're trying to solve. And so I think the principles will stay very true. And many companies are designing a set of kind of more AI focused principles things like trust are becoming one of those really important ones. But in delivering those experiences, I think we're going to develop new patterns, new ways of interaction. You're starting to see a lot more conversational types of interactions that will need to have good quality and good standards around them, but might just feel like a conversation. They might just be very text or voice based. So they might not be as traditional as more of point and click, tap and click type of flows or experiences that we've been focused on for the last several years. And so that's both exciting as a new paradigm to interact, but it's also evolving really quickly.
And I think what's interesting about your company in experience management is you guys are capturing probably millions of points of consumer data on experience, right? And I imagine in the age of AI, does it get harder or easier to share feedback?
I'll give you a great example and I'll try to keep it crisp. But over the past few years, we were seeing the number of surveys getting completed declining, right? And more people were just not as interested in taking surveys. It's a really important part of understanding how customers are feeling, as we described at the beginning of this podcast, right? But when we implemented what we call conversational feedback using AI, literally infusing that right into a survey, we were a little bit like what's going to happen because now it may ask more detail and more quick. Are we going to see that continue to decline or not? And we actually saw just the opposite. So we saw a 10% increase in completion rates, and we saw two times the amount of feedback given that was much more detailed, much more relevant, and we collected that much more data that is valuable to the business because now you're getting an answer that's not just one line in a text box and you're wondering like what do they really mean by that. With our conversational AI at Qualtrics, we can ask a follow-on question and another follow-on question that is specific to the feedback that you gave. So we're drilling deeper into that conversation, we're getting more data and results from that, and our customers are loving it because now they have more clarity about what people are really saying. We actually thought, okay, but how is this going to impact satisfaction? We also saw satisfaction of the people taking surveys increase by more than double digits as well. So it's been a real win for us and a real win for our customers because it's not only helping to get clarity and providing more data, but it's getting more quality data.
So it's interesting. I think for a lot of experienced leaders, like collecting sentiment and gathering that sufficient intelligence to inform their roadmap, what to iterate, what to kill is really critical. And I think no one has probably enjoyed filling out surveys. But I think what's interesting is in the age of AI, back to the core premise of experience management and real time intelligence, conversational being one of the ways in which we can innovate. Any other things that you've seen in which experienced leaders can improve the way they collect data and insight?
Yeah. As you start to add more of these channels where you're listening and getting a more holistic view, so not just in surveys, but you start adding reviews and ratings, and you can understand how customers are maybe posting a review on Google or Yelp. You're starting to add social listening, right? And so you're understanding how people are talking about your brand or their experience that they had in social media. You're then understanding how somebody is having an experience in an actual location, whether at a restaurant, a retail outlet, an event. All those things working together, we now collect that data and provide that to individuals who their responsibility within companies is really understanding the voice of the customer or an overall what we call CX program. So before, they needed to get all that data, they needed to analyze that data, they need to understand, and then they needed to take action on it, right? And that was a long process. Now they're getting that in real time. And so for many of those individuals, they can make decisions about specific customer types. They can make decisions about what might be going on in a specific region. They can react to customers at an event while they're at an event, not days or hours after it. So that real time intelligence is incredibly powerful from moving from just that listen and understanding phase to that acting phase and really taking action on it with our experienced agents helping them to do that.
So you're almost saying in the age of AI, as experienced professionals, our ability to take action should get better if we instrument the right ways in which we can listen, understand at a better scale with more immediacy. Is that kind of what I'm hearing here?
Absolutely. And so when you think about designing in a world of AI, we're designing with data. Previously, you would think about, I need to know all the variations. I want to set up the best case golden paths of how a consumer or user goes through them, and you want to map out all those things. And we were very focused in our craft about like getting those golden paths to be perfect. And then you would try to address the edge cases around it, right? That's not the case anymore. Now you're designing with data, and a lot of times that data you don't even know the results of it yet. So as designers, we have to think about kind of the containers and the outcome of how we might want to display that data and the contextualism or the contextual nature between two different sets of data. So for example, was there a correlation between like the temperature of the room at the hotel and your ability to get checked in? Or was there a correlation between the speed you got your food and your experience of how you felt at that restaurant? We don't know those things because they're happening in real time. So as designers, we tried to pull all that together so we could have the best experience. Now you have to anticipate and understand that not only you don't have the data for that exactly yet, but the data is evolving as we're actually having the conversation. And so we have to think much more about the containers, the display, the way to analyze that and provide that feedback in real time.
I think a lot of us might think of the conversational interfaces as a interface we're familiar when we say AI, but I think in this case, it's flipping its head of if those consumers are starting to engage in that way, how does it change the back end of how we as decision makers think about does the thesis hold true in, let's just say 3 years from now, we have now instrument or real-time intelligence. Does the overall experience of what companies can now provide to consumers get better because we have this data and it's less full of friction to collect that data through traditional surveys, but now we're listening in real time? Does that mean we have a better experience outcome in the future? That's a question. I'm so curious on if these policies are true or not.
It's a great question, and we spend a lot of time on this in our space. The short answer is we believe absolutely yes, because I'll give you a great example. Imagine you're at a basketball game and you're able now to query a certain number of individuals to ask how their experience is during that event. Or you just checked into a hotel and you're able to ask that guest, how are you feeling in that event? Being able to provide our customers with real-time data of how to make those decisions and what to act on, and translating that into a guest, a consumer, somebody operating in a business, a decision point that they can act on right then is game changing. It literally can help you evolve the speed of business to the outcome that you want and the results you want in a way that we never were before, right? Before that was always this kind of post event experience or post decision experience. And now it can happen in real time. And so when you think about how valuable that is to businesses today, it's incredibly valuable. And when you think about consumers and individuals having an experience, if you can anticipate their needs, react to them in real time, award them or reward them in the moment, and change what might have been a frustrating experience into a delightful one, that's the holy grail. So we truly believe that is possible and are working towards delivering that for our customers.
I have a funny question to ask. So maybe the most relatable real-time intelligence example I could offer myself is it often feels like I will say something and somehow ads show up related to what I said. I was like, is that real-time intelligence or what's going on there? 'Cause it's always so somewhat connected. It feels at least.
It's certainly real time listening. And I think many social media companies have gotten really good at that, as well as some online retailers where what you're browsing on your phone or what you're saying in your room, in your space, then shows up on your device is intentional for sure.
And I think before we segue to the final section about advice to CEOs and business leaders and what you're seeing, it made me think a little bit like Minority Report. I don't know if you remember that movie, but the anticipation of what human needs are and how do we as design leaders think about what are the right principles for how much anticipation before it gets creepy versus a thoughtful amount of anticipation. So I feel that might be a central tension also when we're thinking about real-time intelligence.
Yeah, there is a line there, right? And I think it depends again on the industry and that overall experience. But I think if you continue to keep people at the center of all of your experiences and the intent of trying to solve a problem for them or meet a need for them get to a desired outcome for them in the most usable and the most simple, friction free way. That would be the first thing I would give advice to. Keep people at the center. Second thing I would think about is what are the ways that you can understand, personalize, anticipate what those needs may be before they become something that individual has to think about, take action on. Can you present things to them in a way, maybe as recommendations, maybe as trends, maybe as previous decisions or actions they've taken that get them closer to making the decision faster? And in consumer examples, that might be making a purchase decision or have an experience. In a business context, that might be providing the analytics, the real time analytics and insights. So you don't have to go run reports. You don't have to dig through mounds of data. You analyze those trends, you analyze those behaviors, and you present those to them with options that they can take action on. So the second area would be like, how are you thinking about anticipating, personalizing, and providing those kinds of recommendations that AI is incredibly great at? And then the third area I would think about is your goal and your outcomes haven't changed. If you're a customer centric business and you're primarily focused on customer service and CSAT and like long time low, like those outcomes, those goals for you don't change. The way that you may achieve them is different. The way that you may monitor and manage them is different, right? If you're a customer service business and you're trying to reduce the number of frustrating calls, like that outcome doesn't change for you, right? So still stay focused also on the goal and the business outcome you're trying to provide and the value you deliver to customers. The ways that we move through those three different things of keeping people first, understanding, anticipating their needs, helping them to react and take action in more real time, and staying focused on the outcome and the goal you're trying to achieve would still be the advice that I would give and that we talk about quite a bit with senior leaders today.
In our last section here, I'm thinking about your relationship with your CEO and also other CEOs you might be advising or consulting on experience management. What are one or two things that you might want to share with them? I just heard this kind of really great three-part framework. Anything else that comes to mind as we're navigating this world of real-time intelligence?
I guess I start with something that's near and dear to my heart and I think my methodology, my approach, Gordon, which is be curious. Just be constantly curious. So I really encourage my CEO and other leaders to ask questions. Start with this kind of hypothesis of curiosity, this mindset of curiosity. And I say that because none of us have all the answers. Things are moving so fast that week over week things are changing, right? And so what you might have known and might have learned last week is evolving. And especially in larger organizations, the CEO many times is the one who is disconnected from most of the day-to-day work. And so one of the things that I encourage ours to do and others is ask lots of questions. And I think that's a powerful way of getting at what's happening deeper in the organization, what are the trends and feedback that's happening with your customers and your employees. And usually that sparks a series of other types of deeper dives or other types of analysis or other types of root cause or root case analysis problems that then you can assign the right people to go take action on. I think the other thing, and this really depends on relationships and how closely you are with you or your executive or your leader. I feel when you build a really trusted relationship together, you can give each other the kind of feedback that helps you show up as a leader as well. And maybe what your teams might be going through but are too worried to say or too afraid to say. So as design professionals, as people that have focused on understanding human nature, understanding how to solve problems for people, really being empathetic and understanding user needs, like a lot of times we have a little spidey sense pulse on the way people are feeling, maybe sometimes before they even say it. And so I think that's a really valuable and powerful skill that design and creative professionals have, that our intuition helps others understand, helps bring people together to solve problems, maybe helps reduce the tension of a really complex or tense problem you're trying to solve. I feel really fortunate that I have the kind of relationship with my leadership teams that I can also provide those kinds of insights and guidance as well.
It makes me think in a future episode, what would your CEO Zig say as advice to other fellow CEOs about the future experience management? And I really do think what you've highlighted here today makes us think about, yes, there's AI, but at the end of the day, if we're oriented around meeting and exceeding customer needs and what those are defined by, there's a real
Yeah,
opportunity here, in my view, for methods like real-time intelligence to transform how we make decisions faster, better, smarter, and that we can deliver hopefully a better experience landscape overall. Because I think there's a
that's right.
feeling sometimes that AI might create more trash out there because everyone can now create, but how might we bring more thoughtfulness and curiosity to how we deploy experiences?
Yeah, Gordon, you're right on. And I think I'd leave it with this. Like, we talked a lot about this notion of design sense or sensibility, right? And even as these roles change, and even as more people are able to create and more of us become builders and we're building together, we've been working in this space for a long time now. And we built this sensibility around some of the core methodologies and practices, right, that we use in our work every single day. I think that's still true. I think that's still part of our DNA. And so I'd encourage all of the individuals maybe listening to this or trying to push for some of this type of change in their organizations to keep what's core to us at the core.
With that, thank you, Jeff, for joining us today on this gray day in Seattle, but an inspiring conversation on real time intelligence. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Gordon. It's always a pleasure. Appreciate it.